In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. The call to prayer drifted across the Bosphorus just as the sun slipped behind the domes of Istanbul, its echo weaving between minarets and glass towers, while giant LED screens flickered to life outside Vodafone Park, announcing the arrival of Adrian Cole. Adrian stood inside a private suite overlooking the stadium, dressed in a tailored black jacket, watching workers test the stage lights as if they were building a monument rather than preparing for a concert. For weeks, headlines across Turkey and the United States had debated his decision to perform during Ramadan, some praising artistic freedom while others accused him of insensitivity toward a sacred month. On American late-night shows, he had shrugged it off with a charming smile, saying music had no calendar and no religion. Yet in Istanbul, the criticism felt heavier, more personal, almost historic. Outside the stadium gates, small groups of protesters gathered with banners, their chants controlled but firm, while international news crews adjusted microphones and rehearsed dramatic introductions. Adrian had built his career on bold statements and unapologetic interviews, openly declaring himself agnostic and often describing faith as a comforting myth for uncertain minds. His albums had broken streaming records, his tours sold out in minutes, and his brand partnerships stretched from New York to Dubai, making him one of the most influential voices in pop culture. Yet the louder the applause had grown over the years, the more he had begun to feel a quiet echo inside himself, a space that luxury apartments and platinum plaques could not fill. 3 months earlier, during a brief visit to Istanbul to scout locations for a music video, he had woken before dawn to a sound unlike anything in Manhattan or Los Angeles. The melodic call to prayer had rolled through the narrow streets below his hotel window, gentle yet commanding, and he had stepped onto the balcony expecting annoyance but felt something closer to curiosity. From above, he watched men and women walking calmly toward a neighborhood mosque, their movements unhurried, their faces carrying a kind of focus he rarely saw in backstage dressing rooms. He told himself it was cultural fascination, nothing more, but later that evening he found his driver slowing near the same mosque, its courtyard lit softly beneath hanging lanterns. An elderly man sweeping the steps had greeted him without recognizing the global superstar standing before him, offering tea and conversation rather than admiration. They spoke about travel, success, and eventually about purpose, and when Adrian asked why people fasted from dawn to sunset, the man answered that discipline cleans the noise from the heart. The phrase lingered long after Adrian returned to America, following him through award ceremonies and magazine interviews where he laughed at questions about spirituality. Back in Istanbul now, with Ramadan nights illuminating the skyline, he felt that unfinished conversation pressing against his carefully constructed public persona. His manager, Lauren Brooks, paced the suite with her phone pressed to her ear, negotiating with sponsors uneasy about the growing backlash. 2 major brands had already hinted at withdrawing their logos from the stage screens if tensions escalated, fearing association with controversy in a Muslim-majority city. Lauren finally ended her call and looked at him with a mixture of loyalty and exhaustion, asking if postponing the show might protect both his image and the tour's financial future. Adrian answered with a practiced confidence that surprised even himself, insisting the concert would proceed exactly as planned. When she left to coordinate security, he opened the drawer of a polished desk and pulled out a small book he had purchased quietly from a shop near the Blue Mosque. It was an English translation of the Quran, its cover simple and unadorned, and he ran his thumb along the edge as if testing the weight of a secret. He had not grown up religious, and reading about revelation and prophecy once felt like stepping into fiction. Yet certain passages spoke of accountability and mercy in ways that unsettled him. One line in particular described how remembrance of the Creator brings calm to restless hearts, and he had closed the book abruptly, uncomfortable with how accurately it described him. Outside, fireworks technicians tested silent pyrotechnics that flashed briefly against the darkening sky, reminding him of the spectacle awaiting him tomorrow night. Social media feeds on his phone scrolled endlessly between support and outrage, with hashtags in Turkish and English battling for dominance. Some fans defended his right to perform anywhere at any time, while others urged him to respect a month devoted to reflection rather than entertainment. Adrian set the phone aside and returned to the balcony as the evening prayer call rose again, its harmony stretching across the water. For the first time in years, he felt less like a conqueror of stages and more like a visitor standing at the edge of something ancient and immovable. He did not yet know that the concert scheduled for the following night would become more than a performance, but he sensed that Istanbul was no ordinary stop on a world tour. As the city lights shimmered against the Bosphorus and the final echoes of prayer faded into the night, Adrian remained still, holding a silence that felt both unsettling and strangely alive. The silence on the balcony lingered long after the final echo of prayer faded, and Adrian remained motionless as if the city itself were waiting for his next move. Morning arrived with a pale gray sky over Istanbul, and the stadium grounds were already crowded with technicians, security teams, and satellite trucks broadcasting live updates about the controversial concert. Adrian entered the venue through a private underground corridor, avoiding the cameras stationed outside the main gates where protesters had doubled in number overnight. Inside the rehearsal hall, the band ran through sound checks with mechanical precision, unaware that their lead singer was listening less to the music and more to the distant rhythm of his own uncertainty. Lauren approached him with a tablet in her hand, showing headlines from Turkish media outlets questioning his respect for Ramadan and American outlets framing the situation as a free speech battle. He scanned the articles without reacting, though each paragraph felt like a mirror reflecting a version of himself he no longer fully recognized. By midday, reports surfaced that a major European sponsor had officially withdrawn from the event, citing cultural sensitivity concerns, and Lauren's composure began to crack. She reminded Adrian of the financial consequences, the ripple effect across future tour dates, and the investors expecting stability rather than spiritual experimentation. He nodded politely, yet his attention drifted toward the open stadium roof where a faint breeze carried the distant sound of recitation from a nearby mosque. The words were not clear from that distance, but the cadence felt deliberate, like a reminder that time moved differently during this month. During a break, Adrian slipped away from the rehearsal floor and walked alone toward the empty rows of seats, imagining them filled with thousands of faces expecting spectacle. He pictured the flashing lights, the roaring applause, and the version of himself who thrived on that energy like oxygen. Instead of excitement, he felt a tightening in his chest, a question rising that no performance rehearsal could silence. A production assistant rushed toward him with news that community leaders had requested a brief meeting before the show, hoping to discuss the emotional impact of holding such an event during Ramadan. Adrian agreed without hesitation, surprising even himself, and an hour later he sat across from 3 representatives in a modest conference room beneath the stadium. They spoke respectfully, explaining that while concerts were not forbidden, the timing during a sacred month felt painful to many families observing fasting and nightly prayers. Adrian listened without defending himself, absorbing their words as something deeper than public relations advice. One elderly representative asked gently whether fame was worth creating division in a city that had welcomed him with open arms. The question lingered in the air long after the meeting ended, following him back to the dressing room like a shadow. He opened the small translated Quran again, reading passages about accountability, mercy, and the idea that guidance comes to those willing to question themselves. There were no dramatic revelations, only a quiet recognition that his long-standing certainty about faith might have been built on convenience rather than conviction. As sunset approached, the stadium lights flickered on, casting a golden glow over the empty stage that would soon pulse with energy. Lauren entered the room with red eyes, informing him that 2 additional sponsors had pulled out and that security was increasing its presence due to online threats. She asked him one final time if postponing the concert might prevent further damage, framing it not as surrender but as strategy. Adrian stood before the mirror, adjusting his jacket slowly, studying the reflection of a man celebrated for confidence, yet haunted by something he could not name. He thought about the elderly man at the mosque steps who had spoken of discipline clearing the noise from the heart. He thought about the early morning call to prayer that had stirred curiosity instead of irritation. He thought about how often he had mocked belief in interviews, presenting doubt as intellectual superiority. Outside, the first evening call to prayer began, its sound floating above the murmuring crowd gathering at the gates. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, not in prayer but in acknowledgement that the moment carried weight beyond contracts and headlines. When he opened them, The decision to perform no longer felt like defiance but like a threshold he had to cross. Lauren waited for reassurance, and he gave her a calm nod, signaling that the concert would proceed as planned. As she left to finalize arrangements, Adrian remained alone in the dressing room, the distant hum of thousands of voices growing louder outside. He placed the small book back into his bag, not as a prop or symbol, but as something personal he was not yet ready to explain. The stadium announcer's voice boomed faintly through the walls, building anticipation among the crowd. Adrian took a deep breath, aware that tonight would test more than his reputation. He did not yet know what he would say once the music stopped and the lights dimmed, but he sensed that the stage awaiting him held more than songs. As footsteps signaled it was time to walk toward the entrance tunnel, Adrian stepped forward, carrying with him not just a set list, but a growing awareness that the real performance might not be musical at all. The tunnel leading to the stage vibrated with bass as Adrian walked toward the blinding wash of lights, the roar of the Istanbul crowd rising like a living wave. When he stepped into the spotlight, the stadium erupted, thousands of phones lifting into the air, while fireworks painted brief streaks across the night sky. He opened with his most energetic anthem, moving with flawless precision, his voice steady, his presence commanding, every gesture rehearsed to perfection. The crowd sang back every lyric, their excitement drowning out the distant murmur of protest beyond the stadium walls. Between songs, he flashed his familiar grin, thanking Istanbul for its passion, though inside he felt a growing divide between performance and reality. By the third track, sweat traced along his temples as he paced the edge of the stage, watching faces glow under shifting beams of color. The music thundered, yet beneath the rhythm he sensed another current moving quietly through his thoughts. During a brief pause, the band transitioned into a slower arrangement, and the lighting softened to a warm amber that felt less like spectacle and more like confession. Adrian stood still for a moment longer than scripted, staring into the sea of strangers who had come expecting entertainment. He remembered the dawn call to prayer echoing through narrow streets and the elderly man speaking about clearing noise from the heart. The silence stretched, and murmurs rippled across the audience. Unsure whether the pause was technical or intentional, he raised the microphone slowly, his voice lower than before, and thanked the crowd for showing up during a month many held sacred. A few scattered cheers answered him, but most people listened carefully, sensing a shift in tone. He admitted that when he first scheduled the concert, he had thought only about logistics and global tour dates, not about spiritual significance. The confession felt heavier than any high note he had ever sung. He spoke about success, about sold-out arenas and awards, and how none of it had quieted the restlessness that followed him into empty hotel rooms. The stadium grew unusually still, thousands of listeners caught between curiosity and disbelief. He described waking before dawn in Istanbul months earlier and hearing a sound that unsettled him in a way no critic ever had. He told them about walking into a small neighborhood mosque without cameras or publicity, sitting quietly while others prayed. He admitted that he had once mocked belief publicly, presenting skepticism as sophistication. A murmur of surprise moved through sections of the audience who remembered those interviews. Adrian swallowed hard, acknowledging that arrogance often hides insecurity rather than intelligence. He said he had spent the past weeks reading, asking questions, and confronting a version of himself he no longer wished to defend. The night breeze swept across the open stadium roof as if punctuating his words. Some fans in the front rows lowered their phones, sensing that recording felt intrusive in a moment turning deeply personal. Adrian looked up at the dark sky above the stadium lights and confessed that he had been afraid of losing everything if he admitted doubt. He paused, steadying his breath, aware that each sentence carried consequences. He said he had discovered that true strength might lie not in denying the unseen, but in admitting the possibility of something greater. The crowd listened without interruption, as though the concert had transformed into a gathering of witnesses. His voice trembled slightly when he said he now believed in one God, the creator of all things, whose mercy remains open to anyone willing to return. Tears glistened in his eyes, reflecting the stage lights like distant stars. He continued, saying he had learned that Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, was sent as a messenger guiding humanity toward that mercy. A hush deeper than silence settled across the stadium. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with a clarity that felt new even to him. He told the audience he was not claiming perfection, nor pretending transformation was instant. He said he simply wanted to stand honestly before them and before his Creator. His hands trembled as he lifted the microphone closer, the band remaining still behind him. With deliberate calm, he declared that he bore witness there is no God but Allah. His voice cracked but did not break as he continued that he bore witness Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, is the messenger of Allah. For several seconds, no one moved, as if the entire stadium needed time to understand what had just happened. Then from somewhere near the front rows, a quiet repetition of the words emerged. Another voice joined, then another, until scattered whispers formed a rising chorus. Phone lights flickered like constellations while tears flowed openly across unfamiliar faces. Adrian stood motionless, overwhelmed not by applause but by the gravity of shared vulnerability. He had not invited anyone to follow him. He had only spoken truth as he understood it. Yet the words carried across the night air, weaving through thousands of hearts already searching. The concert had become something unplanned, unscripted, and irreversible. As the final echoes of the testimony faded into the Istanbul sky, Adrian realized there was no returning to the version of himself who had stepped onto the stage an hour earlier. The stadium did not erupt into chaos or hysteria, but instead filled with a heavy, reflective silence that carried more weight than applause ever could. A few people continued softly repeating the declaration, their voices uncoordinated yet sincere, while others simply wept without fully understanding why. Adrian lowered the microphone slowly, aware that no encore could follow what had just taken place. The band members remained frozen behind him, instruments hanging idle as if sound itself required permission to return. After several long seconds, Adrian thanked the crowd quietly, not as a superstar closing a show, but as a man acknowledging witnesses to a turning point. He stepped back from the spotlight, the warmth of the stage lights replaced by the cool air of the backstage corridor. Rafi met him there, eyes red, pulling him into a tight embrace without speaking. Lauren stood a few feet away, stunned, her mind racing through contracts and headlines, while her heart struggled to process what she had seen. Within minutes, social media exploded with clips of the moment, translated subtitles spreading across continents in real time. News anchors in Istanbul and New York scrambled to rewrite their scripts, unsure whether to frame the night as spiritual awakening or career suicide. Adrian sat alone in his dressing room, still in stage clothes, staring at his reflection as though meeting someone new. There was no triumphant rush, no dramatic sense of conquest, only a fragile calm settling slowly over the chaos. Lauren entered with her phone buzzing relentlessly, informing him that 3 more sponsors had officially severed ties within the hour. She spoke carefully, almost gently, explaining that future tour dates in certain cities were now uncertain. Adrian listened without interruption, absorbing each consequence like a payment long overdue. He told her he understood and thanked her for standing beside him despite the uncertainty. Outside, the stadium began to empty quietly, conversations hushed, faces thoughtful rather than exhilarated. Some who had repeated the declaration left with tears and trembling hands, aware that life beyond the gates would not be simple. Before dawn, Adrian returned to his hotel overlooking the Bosphorus, the city still glowing beneath scattered streetlights. He did not turn on the television or scroll through his phone, choosing instead to sit near the window as the first call to prayer rose once again across the water. This time he did not observe from a distance. He performed ablution awkwardly, following instructions he had memorized imperfectly, then stood facing the direction he had learned earlier that week. His recitation was hesitant, his movements uncertain, yet when his forehead touched the ground, a quiet release moved through him. It was not euphoria but relief, as though a long argument inside him had finally ended. Later that morning, he agreed to visit the small neighborhood mosque where his curiosity had first awakened months before. The elderly man who had once offered tea greeted him without surprise, as though he had expected this return all along. No cameras were present, no reporters waiting, only ordinary worshippers adjusting prayer rugs before the midday prayer. Adrian stood among them without special introduction, one shoulder aligned with strangers who treated him neither as idol nor spectacle. After prayer, a young university student approached him shyly, admitting she had been in the stadium and had repeated the declaration through tears. She explained that fear of family reaction now weighed heavily on her, yet she felt unable to ignore what had stirred inside her heart. Adrian told her he was still learning himself, that courage did not remove difficulty but made it meaningful. In the days that followed, headlines shifted from shock to analysis, with commentators debating sincerity and motivation. Some accused him of calculated rebranding, others defended his right to change, and many simply watched with cautious curiosity. A major record label contacted Lauren with an offer to stabilize his career on one condition: avoid public discussions about religion and focus exclusively on music. The financial proposal was generous enough to erase immediate losses and restore global partnerships. Adrian reviewed the contract quietly, remembering the silence that followed his testimony and the calm that came with prostration. He closed the folder without signing. He told Lauren that peace of heart could not be negotiated like a sponsorship agreement. Instead of arenas, he began accepting invitations to smaller gatherings, community centers, and charity events during Ramadan nights. At one such event, he sat cross-legged on a simple carpet, sharing honestly about doubt, arrogance, and the long road of self-confrontation. He explained that transformation was not a single night on stage but a daily decision repeated in private moments unseen by cameras. Months passed, and though his name no longer dominated entertainment headlines, he discovered a steadiness that fame had never delivered. He continued studying, asking questions, and surrounding himself with teachers who emphasized humility over performance. When he eventually returned to music, his lyrics shifted from defiance to reflection, from noise to meaning. The stages were smaller, the lights softer, yet his voice carried a sincerity audiences recognized instantly. One evening, standing beside the Bosphorus as the sun set once more behind Istanbul's skyline, Adrian reflected on the night that changed everything. He understood that guidance had not arrived through argument or applause, but through the simple courage to admit he did not have all the answers. As the evening call to prayer rose again over the water, he felt neither divided nor uncertain. He knew the journey ahead would include loss, doubt, and growth, but he also knew where to return when his heart grew restless. And for the first time in his life, that knowledge was enough.